morning, everyone. It's so good to be here in the beautiful city of Stockholm. My name is Confidence Staveley, and believe me, she's me, I'm her. Just that I recently paid a visit to the barber shop and came out almost hairless. So please laugh at all my dry jokes so I don't feel it's because I don't have enough hair. Okay? And today, I'm speaking about a topic that's very dear to my heart, which is API security, but really zooming in on GraphQL API specifically. And I'll be talking about how small mistakes can have big consequences, and specifically how tiny oversights in API security can really lead to big, massive breaches. I see my friend over there. So good to see you, Dan. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, well, before I get to this, I want to give a big shout out to the customer that gave me this approval to share their story around our engagements. Although anonymized, of course, and even if you had a gun to my head, I won't say who they are. But it's just so good to give this permission so we can share knowledge from this engagement. If you didn't already know, I'm the founder of MerkleFence, and we're basically an application security consulting and an application security talent as a service company. And without becoming so salesy, I would say that what we do is we help businesses navigate the complexities of application security with confidence, pun intended. Yeah. And a little bit about me as well, just to know my journey. I was supposed to be a medical doctor. With great intentions from my African parents. That was all they saw as a model of success. And of course, they wanted the best for their daughter that was very smart with the sciences. But I took a gap year between the time I finished what we call high school in the States to when I got into college. And so my parents shipped me off to this school to learn how to use computers. So aside using computers to do basic stuff, I began to learn how to program. I started writing code in C, in C++, in Java, and I immediately knew this was my life. I didn't want to be helping people get well from sicknesses, as good as it might sound. And so I didn't have a laptop of my own, but I bought cardboards because I needed to convince my parents that I wanted to do technology, really. And so when my admission came in to do medicine, I did this presentation with cardboards, and I would lift up one cardboard paper and say, this is why, and I made that presentation, and they let me go on. I went on to get an advanced diploma in software engineering, got a BSc in IT, business and information systems, went on to do a master's, and then got on to cryptography, which was a rabbit hole that led me into information security. And I have this fantastic YouTube series you should definitely check out, where I use food metaphors to basically speak about API security issues. I can't draw a stick man to save my life, and I recently just authored the book on API security for white hat hackers. So let's get right into my presentation. How many of us have GraphQL APIs in our enterprises? Fantastic. So it's almost the whole room. And Gartner had already predicted years ago that by 2025, more than 50% of enterprises will use GraphQL in production. And that's up from 10% that it was just 3 years ago, actually. And there's a very good reason why this is the case, why this adoption has been very, very high. Is because of the efficiency, especially, that GraphQL has offered us. And it's become sort of like the technology of choice for modern architectures. And the key thing that it basically solves is the overfetching or underfetching problem of RESTful APIs. And when you're using GraphQLs, there is this fantastic feature called introspection, right? It's enabled by default, and we've seen that this stays enabled even in production. And while it allows developers a lot of flexibility, ability to be able to debug and see the whole schema as they build without necessarily requiring documentation, it does also present its own unique set of security risk. And if I wanted to put this in a nutshell, I would say introspection allows any client, I mean, it depends on how you basically implement this, it allows any client to be able to ask your API, what can I do with you? That can include asking it, for example, what mutations are available, what data types are there, what's available, what queries can be performed, which arguments are required, or which ones are optional. And you can do this for every query or mutation. And so it is basically, if I was to put it this way, if GraphQL APIs were a city, then introspection is basically this very giant and very detailed map of the city. It gives the users or everyone looking at this map ability to see every form of detail, from where the alleys are, where the escape tunnels are, where the granular details around how the city is structured are. And I like to take your mind to Money Heist, for example. Imagine if this very detailed map was available to the public. Now, regardless of whether or not those exit tunnels or those security or those parts of the city that is supposed to be guarded and accessible to some people under certain circumstances, regardless of whether or not those places are protected, because you have this giant plan possibly published on the billboards, the chances are people will then be able to strategically plan and then attack you from possibly the part of the city where it's not as guarded as the others, correct? Correct? Awesome. So that is exactly the picture that I want you to be able to see with this. And so some people argue that turning off introspection in production is just simply security by obscurity. It doesn't necessarily make your servers or make your systems or information systems more secure. I'm not going to sit here or stand here and argue on either side, but I'm going to present both arguments and basically lead you into what we've done with this customer. Now, the first problem, or rather the first school of thought, is basically introspection allows developer efficiency. It's a pain for developers sometimes when this is turned off in production. And some people also argue that if you do field forcing very well, whether or not you turn off introspection in production, you will still be able to figure out from the error responses, what the schema looks like. You can piece things together, right? There's another school of thought that says that there are tools to mask sensitive parts of the schema. I'm going to argue for this later on, because what we've also seen is that the decision of whether or not to have introspection turned on or enabled in production is typically one that is an oversight. It's not taken with mindfulness, and that's where the real problem is. And so there's also people who say, yes, you have it turned off in production, but then you have it enabled in staging. And it's very easy for me to tell your staging, you're from the production one, right? So it's very easy. But then I like to use this analogy for the people who argue that introspection should not be enabled in production. I say that for us, most times we want to be able to ensure that when we do security right, that we are fruits very high up that people need to stretch to get. But with some of these features turned or enabled without thoughtfulness, I know you can't see me right now, but you become fruit on the ground. So the attackers no longer have to reach high to get to you. They actually have to stoop. And so, which would it be? Making it slightly more difficult for the attackers to get all of this schema information and enables them attack you like we're able to do in this customer case, or actually enabling a visibility filter that's easy to implement that enables you to then protect yourself in some way. And it's a feature that also enables you to be able to make your attack surface smaller. And newsflash, if introspection is enabled, it will be found. There are so many tools. One, Nmap allows you to actually check if introspection is turned on, and you'll be able to interrogate it. There are tools to actually take your introspection, your schema information, and then display it on a GUI. So yes, definitely, you want to have this guy turned off if necessary. Now, why is it very important that I started off my presentation and I'm dwelling on introspection? It's because data shows 50% of attacks on GraphQL API specifically start off with introspection. And Peva basically has put this information out there. And when we breached this logistics company that I said gave us the permission to get on with sharing this information, we actually did just that. And here's how we did it. First, our brief was breach us. We're not giving you any information. Breach us through a forward-facing asset and show us how people can get access to sensitive data. Just go out there and find it for us. And when I hear sensitive information, I'm rubbing my hands together with excitement. So we got on very excited with this engagement. And the first thing we did, we just went out there, looked for their mobile app. Very easy find, right? We found an iOS mobile app live, available to the public. And so we took that mobile app, and we found out that there was this Graphql API that was doing all the heavy lifting. We noticed that it was able to power major operations such as accessing and updating profiles of the customers, viewing order history, managing orders, and we were like, what a gold mine. There was a lot to basically get from this. There were also dead giveaways, telltale signs from this. And so, like everyone else, once we have a GraphQL API, what's the first thing we want to do? Is introspection turned on? Can we have a cheat sheet that enables us to see how this whole thing works? Voila! When we checked, this guy was turned on. And so he allowed us to query and uncover the full schema. And so because we were able to do that, of course, using this query, very standard query which we sent, we're able to see the full schema. I'm not going to show what the results were, but what we're able to see was a full response from the endpoint that basically showed us the whole structure of the API, detailing very sensitive endpoint details such as available queries, mutations, subscriptions, types, and their relationships. Whew, that's so much information for me to work with and for my team to work with. So discovering the entire schema really just made it very easy for us, and we did all of this in very few hours. We were able to then identify potential vulnerabilities. But to do this, we exported the schema to Postman to test for just about everything in an OWASP's top 10 API list. And we found a lot. These were our findings. Out of the 10 listed issues on OWASP's top 10, we found these 5. And I like to call these top 3 the 3 musketeers. They're the bad guys. And we see them almost everywhere. But then we found all 5 of them. The first one was we're able to log in. We're able to get information around orders that were placed on the app when we're also logged out. We're able to see our orders by using our user IDs, and we're able to see that sort of information. We're also able to, with the IDs of other people which we brute forced, we're able to see what they were ordering. We're also able to see a lot of other information about them, and why we're able to do this was because authentication was not properly implemented. Another key thing that we're able to see is we're able to create orders, we're able to make changes to the databases as well. So we're able to make unauthenticated changes to the database. All of this with no access whatsoever given to us by this customer. All of this was all done from the mobile app already available on the App Store. And so we made a lot of changes, and at some point we were like, okay, if we keep doing this, and with no bells and whistles being turned on, then a lot is going on there. And we didn't want to go any further, but we had enough to show to the customer that this was what was happening. And so with all of this experience, I want to make certain recommendations, and I want you to hear me out. First and foremost, it shows that authentication, when it's not done properly, really puts you in harm's way. Authorization also is a key thing. So it's not just checking who I am, but what am I allowed to do? Because if that's not something that is checked, then we leave a lot of room for things like what I'm describing towards us being able to make changes to the database. I even dare say that we could have dropped that database if we wanted to. Regular testing is also a very major thing. Again, from my friend, and I'm going to borrow something he says. He says we ship code every night, but then we test once or twice a year. And But then we test for functionality every day when we ship code, right? But we are not testing for security issues every time before we ship code. We need to prioritize that a lot, or we'll keep getting more and more of these sort of situations. Now, we can't have this manual test I just described to you done every time we ship code. But then we can have testing really embedded across our software lifecycle in a way that there's some form of automated testing happening. Some testing is better than no testing. And introspection, disable or enabling in production, again, I would say is a business decision. But once it's taken, it needs to be taken with mindfulness. For example, what are the controls you have in place for if it is enabled? Again, there are tools to basically close out or block out some sensitive parts of your schema. Are you using that, for example? What is your strong case for leaving it enabled? And if you compare that with the cost of leaving it enabled and what could happen. So all of those things are things you need to weigh, and whether or not you're leaving it enabled is one that has to be a conscious decision and not one that is just gets to happen because by default, introspection is turned on anyway. The next key thing is basically to monitor and log important API information. I mentioned that we're doing all of this and no bells or whistles were turned on, because if there were, then other things could have happened. We would have needed to maybe switch our IPs a couple of times, do a lot of other tricks around. We didn't necessarily need to walk around a lot of landmines when we're doing this. And it just said a lot about what was happening on the back end. Another key thing too is limiting a lot. So rate limiting and throttling is a key thing that we must enforce. Now, this doesn't stop a lot of stuff, but I mean, it's something that is nice to have, because sometimes not having it may have more issues or more bad things happen when it's not there. So it's just really nice to have it. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, but I'm very, very reachable on LinkedIn. I'm very, very active with sharing a lot of information and helpful content there. And I would definitely like to connect everyone in this room. And if you liked what you just heard, again, check out my book on Amazon and just grab a copy if you'd like to see more around API security issues. Thank you so much.